One man hid behind London's foggy streets to brutally murder 5 women and vanished without a trace. His actions left the entire city in terror. Even more shocking was how he taunted the police with letters daring them to catch him. Who is Jack the Ripper? The late 19th century was a turning point for London's East End, especially Whitechapel. This area was a dangerous place. It had overcrowded streets filled with struggling families crammed into tiny, dirty homes. Poverty was the norm, and residents survived on minimum wages. Whitechapel was a haven for thieves, street gangs, and even drunkards. It was a place where crime thrived in every dark corner. Of course, the police were overwhelmed and could barely keep up. How would they navigate the poorly lit street with fog in the air? In this gloomy environment, people struggled to live. For most women, they took to prostitution. These vibrant women wandered the streets at night, hoping to earn enough money to feed their families. Sometimes, too, they were not sex workers. They were just homeless women sleeping on the street. It was in these dark times that an unknown figure emerged. He was believed to be 26 to 38 years old, with a pale complexion, dark eyes, and dark eyelashes. He was said to be 5 feet 6 inches tall and wore a long dark coat. Under this coat, he wore a light waistcoat and dark trousers with button boots. His most dominant feature was his black tie with a horseshoe pin. He was impossible to miss. This stranger would later be known as Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper preyed on vulnerable women in the city, fueling the Whitechapel murders. He targeted lonely and desperate women. Detectives say he approached them in a friendly way. Sometimes, he offered to help them. This guy walked into crowded streets unnoticed and stalked his victims. Just after gaining their trust, he would strike. He slipped away because no one knew him and where he came from. However, residents got wind of unusual murder patterns. This sent waves of fear through the streets of Whitechapel. This man had inflicted terrible injuries on the city, especially among innocent women. Each murder was more horrific than the last. By the time he committed the last murder, whispers of a certain Jack the Ripper filled the air. But who were his victims, and how did he capture them? It was the early morning of August 31st, 1888, and the streets of Whitechapel were quiet and dark. Due to the fog, it was hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Everyone in the neighborhood was asleep except for a few people like Mary Ann Nichols. She was also nicknamed Polly. Polly was 43, and life was cruel to her. Despite working for most of her life, she was homeless and struggling. She spent her nights on the street, hoping to find a home from her little earnings. That fateful night, she was asked to leave the lodge because she couldn't afford the night's rest. Polly swore she would find a man and make some money that night. A few hours later, a cart driver discovered her body. Polly lay lifeless in the street with her throat cut so deeply and her abdomen cut open. Even seasoned police officers struggled to understand why anyone would do that. It became clear that this was far worse than a murder. Little did they know this was the beginning of Jack the Ripper's killing spree. 1 week later, on September 8, 1888, the Whitechapel murderer struck again. This time, 47-year-old Annie Chapman was his victim. She had recently lost her family and took to the streets to make ends meet. Like Polly, Annie survived on bed spaces. She was last seen standing near a pub, talking to a mysterious man. No one thought of who he was, but by 5:30 a.m. that day, her body was found on 29 Hanbury Street. Her murder was even more brutal than Polly's. Not only did her killer slash her throat, but he cut her abdomen and disappeared with parts of her organs. Again, the police were horrified that the killer became more audacious. The city trembled at this news, with many wondering who the next victim was. A few weeks later, precisely on the night of September 30th, 1888, the Ripper struck for the 3rd time. This time he claimed not 1 but 2 victims. Elizabeth Stride was the first of the 2. Like Polly and Amy, life was tough for Elizabeth. She was last seen talking to a man on Berner Street around 12:45 a.m. Eyewitnesses said she was well dressed that night, but by 1 a.m., she was found dead in Dutfield's yard, a few meters away from Berner Street. The Ripper left a wave of suspense with this one. Even though he cut her throat, there were no abdominal wounds. Investigators say someone may have disrupted the operation. Even so, the horror was not over. About 1 hour later, Jack the Ripper approached his next victim. Catherine Eddowes became his 4th person in the canonical 5. She had been in police custody that night for drunkenness, but was later released. Catherine wandered off into the street, unaware that she was walking to her death. At 1:44 a.m., passers-by found her body in Mitre Square. Her murder was the most brutal because the culprit took time with her body. He mutilated her face and abdomen with precision. As if that's not all, he went away with her organs. Since the police couldn't catch the killer, he vowed to continue. The last of the canonical 5 victims was Mary Jane Kelly, a 25-year-old woman living on Miller's Court. Unlike other women in their 40s, Mary was younger and attractive. She worked as a prostitute to make ends meet until November 9th, 1888, when she breathed her last. That morning, her landlord's assistant, Thomas Bowyer, knocked on her door to collect rent, but she didn't respond. He banged the door twice, but no response. Believing she was inside, he pulled the curtain aside. To his greatest shock, she was in a pool of blood. Her body had been mutilated, beyond recognition. For the last time, the Ripper left everyone in shock. The police suddenly became desperate to catch the killer. But then, this man left no clue. Jack the Ripper suddenly vanished into thin air, while families of the canonical five hoped justice is served. While Jack's true identity was not revealed, the police launched an investigation into the most wanted serial killer in London. Who is Jack Ripper? Jack wasn't just a killer, he was a ghost haunting the streets of Whitechapel. No one saw him clearly, and he left no clues. His crimes left the police baffled, because every time they thought they were close to unraveling him, he disappeared. How could someone like him vanish completely? Well, as the murders continued, the public mounted pressure on the police. The Metropolitan Police and Scotland Yard were on their toes. Scared residents demanded an immediate resolution of the case. But while the police investigated the Whitechapel murders, they had several challenges. As you know, these murders happened in 1888, a time when there were no modern forensic techniques, DNA, fingerprints, or CCTV cameras. Detectives relied only on eyewitness accounts, which were sometimes contradictory. The city didn't even help matters. The streets were foggy, making it difficult to track the killer. Adding to the police's confusion were the hundreds of letters believed to be from Jack the Ripper. Even though authorities dismissed some of them as hoaxes, one stood out. This chilling letter was sent to the Central News Agency on September 27, 1888. It read, "I am down on whores, and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. You'll soon hear of me with my funny little games." The letter was signed, "Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." This officially became the first time the killer gave himself a name. It was days after this letter that another murder happened. The police interviewed hundreds of Jack the Ripper suspects, but none of them fit the description of the infamous killer. Montague John Druitt was a barrister and educator from a wealthy family. He was found dead in the River Thames weeks after the last murder. His suspicious death led many to believe he was Jack the Ripper. However, there was no evidence linking him to the crimes. Fingers also pointed at Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant and barber living in Whitechapel. This guy had a history of violent behavior towards women. He was sent to an asylum shortly after the murders ended, thereby fueling rumors that he was Jack. The police could not link Kosminski to the murders. There were also rumors that Sir William Gull, Queen Victoria's personal physician, was involved in the murders. Many residents believe it was a grand plan to cover a royal secret. With these rumors and conspiracy theories flying around, the police were confused. Every lead ended in disappointment, plus journalists ran out of news to report. The police were criticized for their failure to protect the women in Whitechapel due to their class. Thankfully, the killings stopped, but the killer's identity remained a mystery. Over a century later, we still don't know who Jack the Ripper is. This case exposes the limitations of 19th century policing. It also inspired countless books, movies, and debates. But the big question remains, who was Jack the Ripper?